Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the 5 books I read this year that disappointed me the most. So today's video is one I try to approach with a bit of care because it's very easy for this kind of topic to sound harsher than it's meant to be. So I want to be clear from the start. This is not a list of the worst books I read in 2025. I don't think any of these are bad books, and I'm only doing 5 of them because I don't want to focus too much on the negative side of things. Instead, these are the 5 books that disappointed me the most this year. Books I went into with high expectations because of their reputation, influence, or how often they're recommended, and which just didn't quite land for me. Disappointment usually says as much about the reader as it does about the book, especially when you've been reading science fiction and fantasy for a longer time. Timing, experience, and expectations all play a huge role. So think of this as a reflection rather than a rant. I'll be ranking these from number 5 to number 1, with number 1 being the book where the gap between expectation and experience felt the biggest. So, with all of that out of the way, let's get into it. At number 5 is The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. This is one of those books that feels almost unavoidable if you're interested in the history of fantasy. It's often credited with helping popularize epic fantasy for a wider audience, and it launched a massive long-running series. Going in, I wasn't expecting innovation, but I was expecting a solid, engaging classic that would justify its reputation. What I found instead was a book that felt a bit too familiar. The parallels with Lord of the Rings are very hard to ignore, and while I don't mind Tolkien-inspired fantasy, here it often felt like the story never quite stepped out of Tolkien's shadow. I also struggled to connect with the characters. They do what the plot needs them to do, but very few of them felt emotional engaging, which made it hard for me to stay invested. I don't think this is a bad book, and I completely understand why it worked for so many readers, especially at the time this was published in the 70s. But reading it now, it felt more like an important stepping stone in the genre than a story I personally connect with. At number 4, we have Gateway by Frederik Pohl, which was a book I was genuinely excited to pick up. In this book, humanity discovers a space station out in space with working spaceships. People get in and the autopilot takes them to a unknown location with a small chance to get incredibly rich if you survive, but a lot never return. On paper, that's exactly the kind of science fiction I usually enjoy. While the ideas are strong, I found the execution a bit uneven. The framing device, which switches between therapy sessions and past events, started off interesting but became repetitive for me over time. My biggest issue though was the protagonist. I found him difficult to connect with, and because so much of the book rests on his perspective, that emotional distance really mattered. There are moments of brilliance here, and I do admire what Pohl was trying to do, but overall, the book felt more intellectual, interesting than emotional, engaging. And at number 3, there is Timescape by Gregory Benford. Another book I went into with fairly high expectations. This is a hard science fiction novel focused on scientists attempting to communicate with the past to prevent an ecological disaster. The science is dense, detailed, and clearly written by someone who knows the subject extremely well. For me though, the science dominated the story to the point where the characters felt secondary. I understood what was at stake, but I rarely felt it. The pacing is slow, and while it will absolutely work for some readers, it created a sense of distance for me. I admired large parts of the book, but I never fully connected with it. If you love hard sci-fi and scientific process, this may be a fantastic read. It just wasn't quite what I was hoping for. And at number 2 is Neuromancer by William Gibson. A book I was expecting to like to some degree. I have a bit of a mixed experience with the cyberpunk genre, and this book didn't really help improving that. There's no denying how influential this novel is. It shaped cyberpunk and influenced decades of science fiction that followed. I admired the atmosphere, the ideas, and the confidence of the writing, but I often found myself more impressed than engaged. The style can be overwhelming, and I struggle to emotionally connect with the characters. And by the end, I respected the book enormously, but I didn't enjoy the reading experience. This is very much a case of appreciating a book's importance more than enjoying it personally. And my most disappointing book of 2025 was Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. This is a book that came with huge expectations for me, and it's often recommended as essential science fiction. While I found the ideas interesting, the story felt more straightforward and predictable than I'd expected. The moral questions are there, but they aren't explored as deeply as I was hoping for. Ender himself felt more like a functional character than someone I truly connected with. Interestingly, I enjoyed Speaking for the Dead, the sequel, much more, which highlighted my disappointment with this first book even more. Now, I completely understand why Ender's Game works so well for many readers, especially younger or newer science fiction fans. It just didn't hit me in the way I'd hoped. Those are the 5 most disappointing books I read in 2025. Again, not because they're bad books, but because they didn't quite meet my expectations. What's interesting is that all of these are, in one way or another, classics. They've influenced the genre and in some cases even inspired books I genuinely love. Also, there were a lot of sci-fi books. Disappointment, especially with older or highly regarded books, often come down to timing and experience. Reading widely changes how certain stories land. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which well-loved books disappointed you this year? And did any of these work better for you than they did for me? As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.